Hey, what's up guys? So for the past few weeks, I've been driving around with 4 dash cams installed on my windshield, collecting footage for this 4K dash cam video shootout. And we're gonna go ahead and take a look at some test results now from the brand new Viofo A139 Pro, the first dash cam to utilize the new Starvis 2 sensor. We're also gonna be taking a look at the Blackvue DR900X Plus, which is the primary dash cam that I've been running on my windshield for the past couple of years. And we're gonna be comparing it to the brand new Blackvue DR970X. This dashcam was just released this week, and it's the successor to the DR900X Plus. It's got the same image sensor and lens as the DR900X Plus, but it's got a new CPU and new image software processing to go along with it. Now, in addition to just wanting to understand the dashcams better, for some upcoming video reviews that I want to do of both the Viofo A139 Pro and the Blackvue DR970X, in this video, I want to take a look at 3 specific things. Number 1, we're going to take a look at the improvements with Blackvue's new dashcam, going from the DR900X Plus to the DR970X. Number 2, I'm really curious to make this like a battle of the flagships, taking a look at the DR970X versus the A139 Pro. And then number 3, for the A139 Pro, I'm also really curious to see how effective its HDR capability is. That's going to be one of the new advantages here of the new Starvis 2 sensor. This feature is still in development. It's not fully implemented yet, but nevertheless, for this testing, I've got not just 1, but 2 A139 Pros installed on my windshield. One running with HDR turned on, and the other running with HDR turned off. And for this testing, I looked at a bunch of different situations. We're going to take a look at video quality when you're driving around in bright sunny conditions, as well as when you're driving around in cloudy conditions. We're going to see how the dash cams fare when it starts to get darker, including driving around at dusk, as well as driving around at night. We're going to look at some tests both stationary as well as moving. We're going to see how the dash cams fare when it comes to recording license plates, or being able to see cars in general, or recording people around you. And videos like this with a bunch of different dash cams in different conditions and freeze framing video and doing license plate zoom-ins and whatnot, they take a ton of time. And so if you appreciate videos like this, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button. Additionally, feel free to subscribe and hit the notification icon so you can get notified when new videos like this are posted. And so with that said, let's go ahead and start testing out all of these high-end 4K dash cams. Alrighty, so a couple important notes before we get started. For all of the testing that I'm doing, I'm intentionally doing it without a polarizer installed on any of the dash cams. What I found in testing is while polarizers can be really nice to knock out some of the glare on the windshield so the dash cam can better see out your windshield, I've also noticed that that can reduce kind of the resolving capabilities, and different polarizers will basically reduce quality in different amounts. And so for the sake of consistency, I'm just doing the testing without any polarizers at all to give the dash cams the best capability of resolving details. Secondly, the dash cams are going to have a slightly different field of view. For example, with the Blackvue dash cams, they actually record a slightly wider field of view to capture more of what's going on around you. And then with the Viofos, on the other hand, their lens is slightly more zoomed in, and you've got a little more narrow field of view, which is going to give the Viofos a bit of an advantage when you start trying to zoom in and capture details like license plates. And so for that reason, among others, you're going to see that when I'm actually pausing and freeze framing the video, I may do it at slightly different times. I'm basically looking for the very best example of a license plate freeze frame of any of the dash cams. It might be a little bit closer up, it might be a little bit farther away, but I want to find the best that each dash cam is capable of. And so with all that said, let's go ahead and start diving in to the video footage. Alright, so starting off, let's begin by testing in sunny conditions, and we'll look at one of the easiest situations, pulling up behind some cars and taking a look at some stationary license plates. Now first up, with the car directly ahead of me, all the dash cams can easily record the license plate. I do notice though that the Blackvue DR970X is a little bit softer than the other dash cams, but it can still of course read the plate nonetheless. Next, if we take a look at that SUV over on the left, we've got a similar situation where all of the dash cams can capture the plate, but again, that 970 looks softer for whatever reason than even the previous generation 900. I'm also noticing that with the 900, it's a little bit questionable on if those digits are 8s or Bs, but then if you take a look at the Viofos, you notice it's much easier to tell exactly what those different digits are. And then moving on, taking a look at that red SUV that's farther away, the 900 can kind of sort of make out some of the digits. The newer 970 though, it's basically a blurry mess, kind of surprisingly. And then the Viofos down at the bottom, these are right at the edge of being able to make out the license plates. And that's a tougher situation because that red car is farther away, but I do notice that it does do a little bit better job than any of the Blackvues, including the 900X Plus. Next, let's introduce a little bit of motion here and see how well the dash cams can capture a license plate as I'm passing the car. Now, all of the dash cams are able to capture the license plate in this scenario, but again, I'm noticing that the Viofos do a better job. If you take a look at the second and third characters in the license plate, for example, it's much easier to tell exactly what they are in the VFOs, but if you then go take a look up at the Blackvues, you notice it's a little bit questionable, and it's not as obvious if that's COX or CDK. And so even though they can capture the plates, I do still find that the VFOs do a better job nonetheless. Next, let's take a look at some more motion, but faster relative motion, trying to freeze frame license plates of an oncoming car. Now, I'm going to freeze them at slightly different times here. I'm basically picking the best frames that any of the dash cams can capture. And what I'm noticing here is that the 900X Plus at the top is pretty mushy. The 970 actually does a better job at freeze framing action, which is good to see. And the VFOs are better still. They're not perfect, they're not crystal clear, but it's definitely better than what I'm seeing out of the Blackvues. And if we take a look at another similar example, and again, I'm going to freeze frame at slightly different times, picking out the best examples from each of the dash cams. You'll notice again that the new Blackvue 970 does better than the 900X Plus, but the VFOs do better still. You'll also notice that with that white Subaru in the sunlight, it's really bright there, and so the A139 Pro with HDR turned on seems to do a better job compared to the one with HDR turned off, where things get to be a little bit too bright for that dash cam to capture the plate. And then moving on, let's take a look at some cloudy conditions where the dynamic range isn't going to be so extreme. We'll start again with an easy situation, just pulling up behind this minivan here and reading the plate. And of course, all of the dash cams can clearly read the plate. I do notice again that the 970, it's a little bit softer than the other dash cams. The VFOs are going to be more clear, and you can especially notice that by reading the red text that says Washington at the top of the plate. Moving on, let's go ahead and take a look at some footage here with a little bit of motion first. And if we take a look first at the front plate of this gray car that's passing me, again with the Blackvues, I'm noticing that the newer 970 is just softer than the previous generation 900X Plus. Very surprising. This is not what I was expected to see initially, but I've seen a number of situations like this. And then if we compare it to the A139 Pros, they do a good job here, a little better clarity than a 900X Plus, and ultimately no issue reading the plate there. And then if we take a look at that black car over on the right, with the Blackvue dash cams, it seems like this is just past their ability to resolve the details on the plates, but with the VFOs, I'm still able to read the plate numbers here. Now, to be fair, the Blackvue's lens is wider versus the VFO's lens, which is actually a little bit more telephoto and zooms in more, and so it does have a little bit of an advantage here, but it is a difference that I'm seeing nonetheless. Moving on, let's take a look at another driving clip here, and we're going to go ahead and freeze frame it with the car pretty close to me. This way we can negate the advantage of a lens that zooms in a little bit more. And with the two Blackvues, you'll notice that they're a little bit soft. I do think that the previous generation, 900X Plus, again, does do a little bit better here. And then if you take a look at the VFOs at the bottom, they're doing a great job again, just like before. Now, something else to note, if you take a look at the second character on the plates of the VFO dash cams, you can tell that that's actually a Q. Now, if you contrast that then to the Blackvue footage, it's tough to tell, is it a Q, an O, or a 0? You lose that little bit of extra detail there on that character. Between the two, I again think that the 900 does a little better job than the 970. Now, if you take a closer look here at these two dash cams, if you take a look at that silver SUV on the left, you'll notice that the newer 970 does a better job of freeze framing that vehicle and getting rid of the motion blur. And so I think these issues here with the 970 are not necessarily related to motion blur, I'm just noticing reduced clarity overall. Next, let's step it up and try to freeze frame some license plates of oncoming cars. This is going to be even tougher due to the faster relative closing speeds, but if we freeze frame it here and take a look at the plates, again paused at slightly different times to get the best examples from each of the dash cams, you'll notice that none of them here can do it perfectly. I do think that the A139 Pro with HDR off at the bottom does the very best job. In fact, you can tell right in the middle that that's an 8. And if you contrast that to some of the other dash cams, I can't really tell what that character is. Now, just up the road here, I saw another example that actually really surprised me. Check this out. When I'm passing the school bus, if I try to freeze frame the plates, again, none of the dash cams are able to capture their plate. However, if you take a look at the text at the top of the school bus that actually says school bus, that Blackvue DR970X actually does the best job out of any of the dash cams, including the VFOs. And so your results may vary from one situation to the next, which is why I want to show you a bunch of different examples like this to get a sense of the overall trends. Next, let's move on and take a look at some testing here at dusk when it's starting to get darker. And pulling up slowly to this parked car here in front of me, my bright headlights are washing out that reflective license plate on a couple of the dash cams, to the point where they're basically illegible. However, it looks like the HDR built into the 970 is definitely an improvement over the 900X Plus, and the HDR feature on the A139 Pro is also helpful to ensure that I can still read that license plate. Next, if we take a look at a situation where the headlights are not shining directly on the license plate, in this situation you'll notice that all of the dash cams are easily able to capture the license plate of that car in front of me. Then, looking at the plate of that car in the next lane over, The 900X Plus is having a hard time capturing that plate. It looks like due to a little bit of motion blur. The 970 and the Viofos do a much better job in this situation. Then resuming driving, let's say we're matching the speed of another vehicle, such as this black Mercedes here on the right. In this situation, again, both of the Viofos are doing a great job. Very easy to read the plate. The 970, it's a little bit questionable. You can tell we're kind of on the limits of its capabilities, but it is doing a better job than the previous gen 900X Plus. Then looking at another example where I'm slightly passing this minivan over on the right, you can tell with that 900X Plus at the top, even that little bit of motion is enough to just wipe out its ability to capture the plate. The 970 does do a better job of stopping that motion blur, but the A139 Pros, again, do a better job still and make it easy to read those plates. And then if I get a little bit closer to the minivan and then match its speed, in that situation, you'll notice the 900 is now able to actually capture some of the digits a bit. Same thing here with the 970. Again, not perfect, not super clear, but still legible. The Viofos, great job, which is kind of the trend that I'm seeing here with the A139 Pro. Now, what about when I start passing a car a little bit faster? Well, in this situation, the Blackvues, they're not really able to capture the plates. The Viofos, you kind of can. It's not crystal clear, but you can sort of make out some of the digits. I do think that it's doing a little bit better job here, actually, with HDR turned off. But either way, if we try getting a little bit closer here, in this situation, trying again, you'll notice that, well, none of the dash cams are able to get the plates. I am closer, but just due to motion blur, I'm losing the information that I need. Now, it's not always just about license plates, though. Check this out. Driving at dusk here and trying to capture this oncoming traffic, you'll notice that none of them are reliably able to capture the plate. The A139 Pro with the HDR off maybe does do a little bit better, but still not legible. However, if you take a look at that circular badge just above the plate on the grille, that actually looks like the round Volkswagen logo. And sure enough, if you just take a look at the cars itself, look at the difference here. If you take a look at the 900X Plus at the top, the car itself is just really blurry, right? There's a lot of motion blur. The newer 970 does a better job of actually freeze framing the car, but the Viofo does a better job still and makes it easier to identify the make and the model of the car too. And taking a look at another example here real quick, with the 900X Plus, things are pretty blurry. The 970 does do a better job of freeze framing that car. But with the A139 Pro, you can actually start to make out some of the details, including that three-pointed star of the Mercedes logo right in the center of the grille. Then right behind it, if you're familiar with cars, you can tell based on the headlight pattern that that looks like a Porsche SUV. And you'll notice that those details become more apparent as we start going down the list. And in fact, if you take a look at the hood of the car, you can even see that little yellow Porsche logo from the Viofos, a detail that you can't easily tell from the Blackvues. Then right behind there, this light pattern is pretty obvious. This is from a Rivian, and even with the 900X Plus, you should still at least be able to tell that. But the car right behind it, this one's a little bit tougher. If we look at the license plates, again, we can kind of sort of make out some information from the Viofos, but nothing really legible. But if you look just above the plates, you can see kind of the round badge of the manufacturer. That looks like the Hyundai logo to me, and then if you take a look at the lights, the grille, the fog lights, etc., that makes me think Hyundai Veloster. And to make it easier to confirm that, you can even look at things like that vertical line on the outside of the fog light area. You can see that little detail on the different Viofo dash cams, but if you try to find it on the Blackvue dash cams, unfortunately, some of those details are lost, and so it makes it harder to identify the make and model of the car. So even beyond just license plates, having a detailed camera really does make a difference. Finally, let's move on and take a look at some nighttime testing. We'll again start by pulling up here behind this parked car. And just like when I was testing at dusk, you notice the two dash cams in the middle with the best HDR capabilities, those are the ones that are able to capture the plates. With the other two cameras, unfortunately my headlights just basically blow out the plate and you can't read it at all. And then taking a look at another real-world example, pulling up behind some cars here at an intersection. In this case, luckily my headlights are shining just below the license plate, and so all of the dash cams are able to capture the plate. There are, of course, some differences here to the way the dash cams capture the plate, but you can still make out those digits nonetheless. And then if we take a look at that BMW SUV over on the right, with the Blackvue DR900X Plus, it looks like we're starting to already get to the edge of its resolving capabilities. You can still read the plate, but it's starting to get a little questionable. The newer 970, I do think, does a better job, but the Viofos, I think that they do a better job still. And then slowly pulling into a well-lit parking lot here at night, we can take a look at some examples here from a lot of different cars at different distances, and feel free to pause this part of the video if you want to stop and take a look at some of the details. But overall, what I'm noticing is, well, none of the Blackvue dash cams are able to capture any of the plates, while the Viofos actually do a great job. The one with the HDR on actually does do a better job of getting that truck over on the left, versus HDR off. Unfortunately, that one is completely blown out and illegible. If I continue driving and get a little bit closer, I'm now able to actually read that plate. And again, feel free to pause and take a look at this in more detail because it's a lot of plates. But overall, Blackvue's, I can't read a single plate. The Viofo's, not perfect. Some of them are a little bit hit or miss, but it's doing a much better job of actually capturing those details. Now, to be fair, capturing details like plates at night is really tough, but when I'm driving this slowly, I really want a dash cam to be able to do this if possible. Now, what about capturing other details at night that are not just license plates? Well, I'm doing a quick test here walking in front of my parked car, and if I freeze the footage and take a closer look here at my face, with the 900X Plus, it looks very cartoony. It's tough to make out any real details. The 970 does do a better job here to the point where you can start to see my mouth and even some of the scruff from my beard. But the Viofos do a better job still of just getting the details like my eyes, nose, etc. Of my face. And so even though all the dash cams are able to see what's going on around my car, which is very important, I'm still seeing some differences in detail capturing nonetheless. Now, getting back to driving recording though, let's go ahead and take a look at capturing the plate here of this car that's right next to me. If I look for the best frames from all of the dash cams, you can see that every single one is able to capture the plate. There's some differences in brightness, contrast, etc., but all of them are able to do it. Now, it's not always just about capturing the digits of the plate, though. For example, here's a quick test when I'm actually passing a car, and you'll notice that with none of the dash cams, I'm able to capture the characters of the plate. However, if you take a closer look at the colors, that doesn't look like a Washington State plate. If you take a look at the Viofo dash cams, you'll notice there's a little bit of orange in the middle, and then what looks to be green on top. That actually looks like a Florida license plate. Those are details that are really hard to see from the Blackvue dash cams. Maybe the 970 does do a little bit better job here. But either way, with the Viofos, I'm able to tell that that's actually an out-of-state plate, and so even if I can't capture the digits of the plate, that extra information can be very helpful. Finally, let's take a look at one of the toughest situations that you'll encounter, trying to capture license plates at night as cars are driving past you. Now, I'm doing this at pretty low speed here, but surprisingly, check that out. The A139 Pro with HDR turned on is actually able to capture some license plates in this situation. This is something that's really difficult to do, and it's something that I've been really impressed with here by the A139 Pro with its new Starvis 2 sensor. Now, it's obviously not perfect, but it's still a huge improvement compared to the other dash cams. Now, this isn't always going to be the case, though. Your mileage may vary. Here's another example of passing this SUV, and you'll notice that even the A139 Pro with HDR on can't capture the plate. Now, this seems to work best at lower speeds and when your headlights are actually hitting the plate. For example, in this car that stopped here to make a turn, I can kind of make out some of the information here with the A139 Pro. The more motion and relative speed you get, the tougher it gets. But nevertheless, the A139 Pro with HDR on does seem to be doing a better job than the other dash cams here that I'm testing. Now, taking a quick step back from license plates again here real quick, can you identify the make and model of this car that I'm passing? I'll zoom in here a little bit to help, but if you take a look at the 900X Plus, it's pretty blurry, it's tough to make out details. The 970X, it's also still pretty tough, but with the A139 Pro, you can make out the shape of the headlights, you can see the horizontal grille slats, you can see some of the details in the fog light area, and based on that information, that makes me think an Audi SUV, specifically the Q7. And then taking a look at another quick example, here's one of a red vehicle that's passing me. If we freeze frame it and zoom in, it's tough to get some detail out of the 900X Plus. With the 970, it's still kind of tough to get the details, but with the Viofos, it does a better job of identifying the shape of the headlights. I can see more details in the shape of the grille, as well as the fog lights. And based on that, my guess would be a Cadillac SUV. I think the SRX. And what about things besides cars? What about capturing things like people or animals like deer in the road? Well, if we freeze frame here, if you take a look over on the right, there's some people walking on the sidewalk. With the Blackvues, it's tough to make out some of the details of their bodies in the shadows. With the Viofo, it does seem to do a little bit better job. You can see their bodies and their heads. And just up ahead, you can see the dog that they're walking. And if we slow down and zoom in, you can see that things are going to be kind of more blurry here with the Blackvue dash cams. Versus with the Viofo, it does a better job of seeing details like the dog's legs or the shape of their body or their tail sticking up. And I know these are little details, but that can be helpful if you encounter deer or bear or anything else like that on the road too. And then as far as two last things that I wanted to mention about just kind of video quality overall, there does seem to be an issue with the A139 Pro with HDR turned on. You'll notice that there's times where the video footage will quickly change brightness, almost like the dash cam is hunting for the proper exposure. This is particularly prevalent when it's really dark, and especially if you even put a polarizer on in front of the lens. And this is something that I didn't notice as much from the other dash cams, including the A139 Pro with HDR off. It doesn't necessarily compromise your ability to make out details, but it is something that I noticed nonetheless. And then finally, just looking over a lot of video footage with the Blackvue DR970X, I noticed that overall, things just kind of seemed grainier than I was expecting. And every time I switch back over to the A139 Pro, the video footage is just so much clearer than what I see out of the 970. And so when it comes to purely video quality between Blackvue and Viofo's flagships, I'm definitely giving the win here to Viofo. And so, yeah, as far as the main takeaways now after all of this testing, the biggest one, of course, is the fact that, well, Viofo versus Blackvue, clearly, as I mentioned, the Viofos are going to have better video quality overall. You can cherry pick little situations here and there, but the trend overall is definitely clear. Now that said, there's many other things that are important in a dashcam too, and I also want to do a follow-up video kind of going over like the Viofo A139 Pro versus the Blackvue DR970X. Like, obviously video quality is important, but there's a lot of other stuff too, like the parking mode implementation, or the way the voice notifications work, or some of the more advanced features like cloud capabilities. And so there's a lot of really important aspects to think about when choosing a dashcam. Maybe the Viofo is the best option for you, maybe the Blackvue, maybe something else altogether. And so I definitely want to do a follow-up video between the flagship Blackvue and Viofo. And then as far as takeaway number 2, Viofo A139 Pro's HDR capabilities. It seems like there's some situations where HDR on is a little bit better. There's other situations where HDR off is a little bit better. But there's also situations where HDR on is significantly better. And so overall, I think that the HDR feature is a net positive here on this dashcam. And so for that reason, if it was me, I would run the dashcam with HDR turned on overall. There is a feature, Auto HDR, that lets you automatically switch on and off based on time of day. That feature is currently buggy, and they're actually working on a firmware update to address that. I can get into maybe some more of those specifics when it comes time to do the full review. But for the time being, at least based on the results that I've been seeing, I think HDR on is going to give you the biggest advantage and the best capability of actually making out details. And then third, as far as the Blackvue DR970X, I don't know, I've definitely got mixed feelings here on this dashcam. I mean, every time a new Blackvue comes out, I'm like, yep, let's upgrade. It's going to have better video quality, better dynamic range, more useful features, etc. But this seems to be the first time where that's not necessarily the case. I've been very surprised to see that there's situations where the previous DR900X Plus actually has better video quality. There's been many times, especially in the daytime, where it just seems like we've got reduced clarity and reduced quality out of the new DR970X. That said, the new model does seem to have an advantage when it comes to having reduced motion blur and kind of freeze framing action. Additionally, the dynamic range improvements with HDR is significantly better with this new model. They both have HDR built in that you can't turn off, but it is much more effective here with the DR970X. Now, as somebody who really cares about video quality, I would love to see Blackvue actually further improve the video quality here. Like, for example, the DR970X, the bitrate is roughly half of what you're going to be getting with the A139 Pro. A139 Pro is saving a lot more information in the video files, and so their video files are like twice as large. There are reasons why Blackvue may want to have a lower bitrate, especially because they're focusing so much on the cloud. If you have big, huge video files, it's going to take a while to upload the video. You're going to blow through your data caps a lot more quickly and whatnot. So there are reasons to balance this kind of stuff. But nevertheless, I would love to have the option to be like, man, just crank up the bitrate, max out the video quality, and just, yeah, use all my data. You know, but I really want good video quality. So I would love to see more improvements here with the Blackvue. And I'll get into more of that stuff once I get into the DR970X video. But yeah, anyways, with all that said, I'm happy to see some improvements here from both brands, both manufacturers. I think that Viofo has the win here. And if you want any of these dash cams, down in the video description, I'll link to all of them as far as where you can purchase. And so with that said, yeah, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys are doing great, and I'll see you in the next video.